I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail, seabed mining. Who wants to do it? What are they looking for? And why they've suddenly started withdrawing from the consents process. This is the soundtrack of a forest and bird video on seabed mining. It's rallying funds to stop Trans-Tasman Resources being given permission to mine the seabed off the coast of Taranaki, where creatures including the endangered blue pygmy whale live. TTR wants to spend the next 35 years sucking up iron ore, basically by digging up the top 11 metres of the seabed. TTR has a really cool video too. Even the company admits the mining will totally destroy the marine ecosystem, but for a very limited time, in a very limited area, it says. And what it takes from the area will be vanadium and titanium, the materials that we need for eco-solutions that will decarbonise the world. For batteries. TTR's already spent more than $85 million in preparation for this, in permits, geological investigations, marine research, engineering and consulting, and lawyers. Most recently before the Environmental Protection Authority. Now they may have struck a shortcut, and the company has withdrawn its applications for marine consent and marine discharge consent. They're on Chris Bishop's fast-track list.
The minister sent letters to about 200 organisations. He wouldn't say which, but after some pressure, finally released the list today. It included construction, fishing and energy companies, as well as ports, iwi and councils. But environmentalists are particularly concerned about the mining companies that are on the list, which have had consents declined previously by our current environmental protections.
Mining companies including Trans-Tasman Resources.
That's the fast track. So yes, if you don't get in through one door, another may open, and this government has opened the door to what they call regionally or nationally significant projects, and the way that they can get past these kind of constraints, some would say environmental protections, but constraints to development is to apply to the government and be considered for their fast track, and so that would be their one-stop shop, as they call it, and if you're deemed significant, then you get into the process, and then there is a committee that considers your application and then makes recommendations to the ministers who make the final say.
David Williams is Newsroom's Environment and Climate Editor and has been tracing the efforts of TTR to get its mining consents.
Its eggs seem to be in the one basket now, so I don't know whether you could see that as an admission that they think that they weren't going to get this EPA reconsideration off the line if they were going to get it approved. But it does appear now that its fate is in the hands of ministers, and that certainly seems what they say would be a cheaper and less risky way of getting approval, because the process is shorter, there seems to be fewer environmental constraints, and at the end of the day, if a minister decides that it is a regionally or nationally significant project, then it can be approved, no matter what the recommendations are from this committee.
And of course there's been so much uproar about the fast-track approvals scheme as proposed that Chris Bishop has talked about modifying it, hasn't he? But I mean, these guys, TTR, Chatham Rock was on that email list. You know, they seem to have some confidence that it was almost like a nudge and a wink in the right direction for them.
Yeah, they said they were formally invited or they were requested to go through the fast track, and you could see that as an interesting use of language in one way, but maybe that's more the way that the corporates work when they're listed companies and they have to try and shine before their investors. It does sound a bit better, doesn't it, if you say you've been requested or formally invited, but it appears to be semantics. Chris Bishop certainly pushed back on that.
People are sort of over-egging it again. It's not an invitation. I want to make that really clear. It's sort of been reported by some people as saying that I invited people to apply. It's not. It's a form letter, a courtesy letter. During the initial stages of the fast-track development, a lot of people got in touch with us and said, we want to know how to apply, we're keen to be involved, etc., etc.
The Detail's already done a couple of podcasts on the fast-track legislation. The last was on April the 30th, if you want to look it up. But today we're concentrating on seabed mining and what companies are looking for down there.
Well, they're looking for, generally speaking, those precious minerals that we put in the likes of solar panels and wind turbines and our electric car batteries. So these things, iron ore, you might say, they go into these things, and they're pretty important to make them work. Another thing that might be found is phosphate.
NZX-listed Chatham Rock Phosphate wants to mine in deep water off North Canterbury. It's also on Chris Bishop's list.
The company is based in New Zealand, and our main deposit is there. We have a rock phosphate deposit offshore New Zealand. It's 23 million tonnes of rock phosphate on the seafloor. Our main focus is to mine that and sell it into fertiliser markets around the world.
So yeah, it's a fairly invasive process. If you think about mining, the way I think about mining is, say, gold mining or coal mining. You have to dig into the ground and you have to blow things up, or you have to use big drills and you extract things. Well, extraction's a wee bit different in this case because you have to actually do something with the seabed. So you might use a big suction unit or these big jets to liquefy the surface of the seabed, and then you suck that up. And another way to do it is to actually dig into the seabed itself and create a big trench. So whatever is on there is toast pretty much, you would think, and that would be a whole bunch of creatures, flora and fauna. And so from that, if you imagine there's a vessel up the top and it's attached to this crawler on the bottom that's doing the actual mining or the sucking up of this material, and that then goes up to the vessel to be processed. And a lot of what comes out, 80 to 90% of what comes out is then put back as waste, if you like, down another pipe, and then exists as a plume near the seabed. It's deposited near the seabed, but of course, the way that the ocean floor and sea currents work, it creates this big plume. So it's a wee bit different mining in the water than it is on land.
It almost feels like you're describing some sort of sea creature that intakes, and then it goes through its body and then outtakes, like a slug.
Well, that's not a bad way of describing it. It is a bit like that. And you could say that this crawler thing, it does look like a bit like a monster, but you could say that of any large device, couldn't you? If you think about the big pieces of kit that are involved in, say, coal mining or gold mining, they've got a bit of a monster quality to them as well.
And even the companies who are trying to do this, I'm thinking of Trans-Tasman Resources boss Alan Eggers, says mining totally destroys the marine ecosystem.
Yeah, there's a caveat to that. I mean, yes, it does. So you would think that sucking things up, putting it through a pipe and processing it, and then the detritus, if you like, is then kind of pumped back down to the seabed. Total destruction. His caveat is that, it actually recovers, that things start recovering almost immediately, and within a couple of years it's back to where it was. But I don't know that everyone would agree with that assessment. If you destroy things, including living things, that's the end of that. And recovery is not the same, and especially if you're changing what happens on the seabed. If there are hard elements to the seabed and then you're processing that and it becomes soft sediment, it's a very different habitat. So things that live in places with hard surfaces can't live in soft surfaces. So I think there's a lot of questions about that kind of assessment.
And questions that haven't been answered yet, I'm presuming, because we don't really know what's down there in the abyss.
Yeah, so Trans-Tasman Resources is going relatively shallow. It's between 19 and 42 metres, whereas Chatham Rock Phosphate, which wants to mine the Chatham Rise, this area about 400 k's off the coast of Canterbury, they want to mine in areas up to 450 metres, the depth of 450 metres. That's a long way down, and luckily for Chatham Rock Phosphate, the company, there's actually been a lot of surveys done of life in the area, whether it's fish life or the constituent parts of the seabed. But then there is actually a lot that you don't know when you're working at such depths, including the currents and what will happen to the plume. And so, yes, I think the more you start looking, the more you realise what you don't know. And if you look at some of the rulings about mining, and generally it's the Environmental Protection Authority and the decision-making committees that they form, they've often knocked these particular applications out because of the uncertainties involved with it.
I mean, I guess you can see this in who some of the objectors are, including the fishing industry often objects to these things, which would indicate that they think they're going to be affected.
Yes, exactly. They've presented evidence to several hearings about seabed mining, and they are what you would call existing interests. They operate in many of these areas, and you would worry about what would happen as a result of this mining. There was one description I saw before which said, for particular, going back to marine mammals, so you're talking about, say, blue pygmy whales, it's like living next to a vacuum cleaner for 35 years, which was the proposed consent period. And when you have that involved, so you've got noise, you've got lighting from the vessels at night, and then you've got the sediment plume. And so you think about the way that sea life interacts with each other and the food chain. If you affect the food for a lot of the different species, whether it's fish species or marine mammals or even birds, then there's a lot of unknowns about how that will all play out. And it's fair to question the effect of this kind of mining on the food sources of fish.
Clark and Dorr had a Shane Jones-esque take on this over a decade ago.
They say the area we want to dig up is a whale breeding area.
Is it?
No, it's not.
It isn't.
No. Well, that is to say, it won't be.
Well, when won't it be?
Well, it won't be when the whales get out of the area, will it?
Well, where are the whales going to go?
I don't know. I don't even know there are any whales there.
Isn't it a breeding ground, though?
I've never seen any whales breeding out there.
Well, have you been out there?
Of course I've been out there. I was out there the other day.
On a whale spotting boat?
No, on a dirty, great big new drilling rig we've got that can displace an area the size of India in an hour and a half. Fantastic.
I am the Minister of Resources. I look forward to leading the debate, changing the law, enabling gas and oil exploration, wealth development to take place yet again in New Zealand. Mining is coming back as well. And if there is a mineral, if there is a mining opportunity, and it's impeded by a blind frog, goodbye freedom.
One of the arguments of the opponents of these particular applications is that there should have been done, and it has been requested before, 2 years of environmental monitoring to show what the baseline is. Where are these species? How important are they, or rare are they? And are they actually at risk from all of this? Plus the idea that you're relying on modelling, maybe there would be more physical modelling that goes in. So try and create some of these plumes, for example, near the ocean floor or the seabed floor, and see what they do and how dense those clouds are and whether what the fish do. So that uncertainty is a very big factor when it comes to these applications.
Ironically, both Chatham Rock and TTR claim some green credentials. TTR because they're looking for the ingredients in batteries, and Chatham Rock says their work means New Zealand farmers won't have to use imported fertiliser, which is less environmentally sound.
There's lots of rock phosphates around the world, but they're different, and our one is what's known as a reactive phosphate rock, or RPR. Now, RPR is known for its environmental qualities. It's much better in terms of runoff into waterways. And our rock is also exceptionally low in cadmium, which is a heavy metal which causes cancer in humans.
Is this, David, the devil of the deep blue sea? Excuse the analogy. But if we want to head towards, full decarbonisation and advance EVs and make wind turbines, we need these minerals. Can New Zealand just say, oh, yeah, sure, we'll get them, but not from our place?
Well, those are always the trade-offs and the arguments that you have, aren't they? I mean, where are these minerals? Where are they prevalent? Can we get them? Can we do it safely? And I think that a lot of people, if it could be done safely and it was proven to be so, I don't think people would be so worried. But it's that uncertainty, and when you, quite rightly, the devil of the deep blue sea, the amount of uncertainty involved and the scale of these things. I know that the ocean, the sea, these are big places and that new habitats can be found or fish can swim around it. I know those arguments. But there is so much uncertainty. So if you do start mining and then 2 or 3 years later you start having, dense sand wash up on the shores and hurting, marine life or bird life or coastal areas, then could there be some sort of change to a consent to protect those places? I don't know. But I think that it's better to ask those questions now and to get the research right and make sure that the science is good to ensure that doesn't happen. We know that if there's a huge ejection of material, it's going to end up on the coast at some point. So there will be some effects. I guess the law would say that they have to be material. Well, that's a fine line. How do you determine that? So that uncertainty is a big problem, I think. And it really is beholden on these companies to prove that what they're going to do is safe enough and that there won't be material problems for the environment. Yeah.
So what are the main live issues at the moment in New Zealand? So there's Chatham Rock off Kaikoura, Trans-Tasman Resources for iron sands off Taranaki. Who else has got an active interest in ploughing up the seabed at the moment?
Well, there's Pakari, of course, so sand mining for cement, which is another one. And only last month the Environment Court knocked out an appeal against their consents to be renewed. And this has been happening for a long time, sand mining there, so north of Auckland, on the Hauraki Gulf.
RNZ data journalist Farrell Hancock has written thousands of words about Pakari sand.
It's not much fun down your togs, but it definitely is useful for lots of other things. It's used in construction, especially in concrete, sand pits. I don't know what else, but construction is the big one, and Auckland in particular uses a lot of sand. So I think in 2021, Auckland used close to 800,000 tonnes of sand. And there's estimates that by 2043, I think it is, we'll need somewhere between, and this is very rough, 1 million and 2 million tonnes of sand just to keep our city growing.
Is that all coming from Pakari?
No. So in 2021, sort of almost half, 45% came from Pakari, and a little bit over half came from Kaipara Sand Limited,
Okay.
So that's on the other side.
Right. What in particular has that Pakari sand been used for in Auckland, for example?
It has been used for some really, really big projects. So we're talking about the Central Waste Interceptor and the City Rail Link. It gets used in various construction. It's very good for high-strength concrete because it's, I don't know whether you've been to Pakari, if you walk on that sand, it actually squeaks when you walk in it. It's amazing. And that's part of what makes it so good. It's mineral content, and the size of the particles is very uniform. You don't need to add a lot of cement to it to make it good concrete, and it doesn't have many impurities like silt. So it's really good for those projects which need high-strength concrete.
How long has the sand been mined from offshore of Pakari?
It's been since the 1940s, so we're talking 80 or so years. It's a long, long time. And it's good sand, and the logistics of getting it from Pakari to Auckland are really easy.
And in that time, has there been any studies or have locals noted any changes to the coastline or if it's doing any damage?
I'll start off with the locals. So the locals definitely say they see their coastline being eroded. And it's hard to quantify this because sand moves over time naturally, and it's hard to say, is it because the sand's being extracted or is it just the natural to and fro? But they definitely believe it's taken away from their beaches. They've also seen impacts on their wildlife. There used to be lots of horse mussels in the area. Those are all gone. So to explain how the sand is taken, there's a boat and it drags this dredge, almost like a Roomba, along the ocean floor and sucks everything up. Takes the sand, spits out, kind of crushes and spits out other things. So it completely destroys, things like horse mussels or scallop beds or anything like that.
It's scorched earth kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is. Yes. So it's all stony corals, these little patches of stony corals that will all get obliterated in the process. So they say there's definitely been ecological impacts in terms of the horse mussels, and they worry for bird life for two reasons. One is they feel the erosion of the sand has made nesting sites get closer to the water. So when there's storms or king tides, nests can get completely flooded. And the other thing they worry about is the effect on the food web, which is a little bit unknown, and whether that will affect some of the really endangered species of birds which nest on those shores, like the fairy tern.
The most endangered.
The most. There's only
in New Zealand. There's
fewer than 40 birds around. So the death of just one is actually a really big deal and could, impact the survival of that entire species. So the other thing about information, I've talked about the locals. So the dredging company, as part of their consents, they are supposed to do monitoring as well. Now, there's been a court case where they were trying to renew. Well, first of all,
this is McCallum Brothers we're talking about.
McCallum Brothers, and it was Kaipara Limited as well at one stage. Now it's all McCallum Brothers. So they were trying to renew resource consents, and they went through a council process where there was a hearing with independent commissioners, and 2 consents got refused for lack of information, one got approved. Then it went to the Environment Court because McCallum Brothers challenged the Commissioner's refusal. Right. So it went to the Environment Court, and the Environment Court decision, which was released just in April, sort of noticed a complete lack of information. And one of their words was, monitoring has been done in the past, but it's been sort of patchy, inconclusive, and at times there's been incorrect results.
How do they know that?
There was this assessment. So when it comes to sand mining, there's this thing called coastal processes, which is how the water and the sand moves over the bed. And one of the experts for the sand mining company said that sort of sand from way out at sea, about 145,000 tonnes a year, washes in to replenish what's being taken. Now, other experts said, hey, you've made a real mistake here. And it turned out that eventually they all agreed it's only 12,000 tonnes. So there's a big difference between 140,000 tonnes and 12,000. One of the reasons the courts rejected is they said, look, it's a little bit weird that McCallum Brothers has come to this court case thinking that it's the job of the people against it to prove there's an adverse effect rather than trying to prove themselves, bringing the evidence to prove that there is no adverse effect. So they're saying, look, McCallum Brothers, you need to bring some evidence and some information to this proceedings, and you didn't. There wasn't enough information for the court to make a decision.
Farrar says this is not about a bunch of NIMBYs sick of seeing a dredge from their holiday homes.
The dredge only runs at night time, so it doesn't run during the day. They don't see it when they're sitting on the beach, having a swim in the daytime. It's only at night. And a lot of the locals have taken pains to point out when I've talked to them that it's not NIMBYism. They don't generally see it, but they are really upset at the effect it's having on the beach. I've also talked to iwi and hapu there, and they are very, very upset. And they say, look, they see themselves as katiaki, or guardians of that area, and they say the damage which has been done to the environment, the ecology from the sand mining means that they can't perform their duty that they see they should be. So it's a range of locals that are upset by it.
So we need concrete. If we don't get the sand, we don't get to make the concrete. Where would you get the sand from if it was not taken from Pakari?
Kaipara has consent to produce more sand than what it currently, altogether, than it currently is, but might take a little bit of upscaling. So that's from the ocean, from what I understand. They also have some quarries now where they are manufacturing sand, so crushing rock, manufacturing sand. I believe they've got 2 quarries. One sort of closest to Auckland, they say they could make sand from for 100 years, and another one maybe is at Brookby, a little further out, where they say they can make sand from it for 1,000 years.
Wow. So
there are options. Whether they're the top tier, top grade quality of sand like Pakari sand, I'm not entirely sure.
And it's not as easy as just scooping it up from the ocean floor.
Yes, it's more of a process. Yeah, I mean, it's been a very cheap, convenient source of sand, Pakari, for 80 years.
And McCallum Brothers wasn't on the fast-track email list, but the company has put in a submission to the bill asking for sand extraction to be included in the allowed activities.
If it does go through under fast track, all those local voices, so the hapu voices, because they don't have a settlement, some of the hapu, they won't be heard. A lot of the locals have employed experts and, paid out of their own pockets to get science done, which wasn't done by the company, and they won't have a chance to be heard during the fast track process. So they're all quite worried about it, saying, look, they'll pursue every legal avenue they can, but they think if court's decisions were ignored and this was pushed through under fast track, it could lead to people getting out there with a flotilla of boats and coming around Cape Rodney to protest the sand dredge.
That's it for today. The details supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Jeremy Ansell. Thanks to Farrar Hancock and David Williams. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite anō.